So hey everybody, the purpose of this video, we are going to take a look at topic 4.6, one more little round of enlightened absolutism and enlightened monarchs, at least kinda. Here on this one, we're going to focus in on what's happening with Russia during the 18th century. Here we go. All right, so I do have to be me, and I have to make sure I am like hitting a little bit of context for us because it really does matter for us on this one. So we did talk about in class already how absolute monarchies plus Enlightenment philosophy leads us to this whole round of like enlightened monarchs. Whether you're talking about Frederick the Great of Prussia, who is enacting Enlightenment reforms, even though he might really just be doing it to make Prussia a more powerful kingdom and himself a more powerful king. Over here in Austria, we saw Joseph the Great. Not so much Maria Theresa as enlightened, but as Joseph the Great as an enlightened monarch who does really great enlightened things, trying to make sure he is getting more power to more people and taking care of the rights of his people. And as a result of all this, he makes his empire a little bit weaker because how can you be an absolute monarch in any way whatsoever if you're giving your powers away? Prussia and Austria are two of about to be like the big three that are going to be dominant in Eastern Europe. But the third one, well, we have to get to them because we haven't talked about Russia in a while. So let's get over to Russia. So in Russia, we are talking about Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great, who is the Empress of Russia, takes over in 1762, and she's there until like the 1790s, going into the era of the French Revolution. She is a very interesting figure. She is really the only Russian Tsarina. That's the Russian Empress, as you get into like that Russian language on things. But the weird part of it is like she's not even really Russian. It was like her husband was a czar. She was actually born in Germany, there in the Holy Roman Empire, and she's able to just sort of like manipulate her way into getting into a position of power and authority. It's like she's really a fascinating figure, but we're going to limit conversation to her as to how she approaches her power and how she approaches the Enlightenment ideas going on at the same time. So big influence on her is a peasant revolt against her power in 1773. This guy named Evgeny Pugachev. He was a soldier from the southern regions of Russia. He kind of undertakes this huge, massive uprising of serfs and peasants. This is the largest peasant, in terms of numbers of people, is the largest peasant revolt ever. But just like any other peasant revolt that you could imagine, it still is going to end in failure for this. Pugachev, he declares himself to be the next Peter the Great. Tsar Peter III is what he calls himself. But when Catherine is able to get her armies in place to kind of settle all this down, she is going to crush this rebellion and kind of use her power in a huge way to kind of, well, keep Russia stable and safe. In that stable, safe way of doing things, she is going to continue the westernization of Russia that was started by Peter the Great, which is kind of why, like in the video we watched on Peter, this is why there's like that reference and why Catherine is going to get a whole lot of notoriety, because she's bringing in she's continuing to bring in Western culture and Western Enlightenment ideas into the country. This includes a series of educational reforms. This is a little bit less about like having schools in function for more and more people, but this is more about sort of like getting more books printed and getting more circulation that way. Maybe a little bit more of an Enlightenment print culture coming into play in Russia than what has ever really been seen before. And then she has like limited allowances for religious toleration. There was, in terms of like the old believers of the old Russian Orthodox and the new, I mean, Catholicism's not really ever big in Russia, but the old believers and the new believers, so far as the Russian Orthodox Church is concerned, there is a level of acceptance that's put forward on this. And under her reign, she's even able to give like civil equality to Jewish Russians. This is like very limited in how far it's going to go into the future. And there were some limitations that were still there, and Jews weren't allowed to kind of rise to a level of nobility, but there's some protection of the laws that's going to be put in place. There are definitely some limits to her reform. She is in all of her decisions. It is really being done for the benefit of the power of Russia, for the Tsarina herself, or for the upper elite members of the nobility. So a little bit like what's happening with Frederick the Great. But under her rule, serfdom in Russia actually gets even more severe than it was before. That if you think about this in terms of Pugachev's rebellion as a peasant revolt, there's a real serious crackdown on the serfs, and so this kind of makes her maybe only at best partially an enlightened monarch in any way whatsoever. And then, so far as the power structure in Eastern Europe is concerned, there is definitely a balance of power that comes into play that is being felt by the growth of Russia and Austria and Prussia. And so I know it's kind of hard to make out some of the fine print on this map, but here in the legend it tells you what we're talking about. This is Poland, and this is Poland as it is being conquered by the Austrian army coming up from the southwest, the Prussian army coming in from the northwest, and the Russian army coming in from the east. And over the course of the 1770s to the 1790s, Poland, which we haven't talked about too much in class at all, but Poland was a viable, strong point in Eastern Europe, back at the very beginning of this course. But by 1795, Poland has been wiped off the map because Prussia and Russia and Austria kind of worked together to make that happen. So in the scheme of this, what they've done is completely redrawn a balance of power in Eastern Europe to where it's Russia, Prussia, Austria that are going to be the dominant forces in Eastern Europe really for the rest of this course. So there's a new balance of power. There is a new czar, czarina in Russia in this case, and there are the on again, off again push of Enlightenment ideals going further into Eastern Europe. Thanks for listening.